On March 8, 1968, something exploded in the North Pacific Ocean. The sound was violent enough to be picked up by underwater listening devices thousands of miles away. A sharp crack followed by a sustained implosion. The acoustic signature of a submarine being crushed by extreme water pressure. 98 Soviet sailors died in that moment. Their submarine, designated K-129, plummeted to the ocean floor 16,500 feet below the surface. The Soviets knew something had happened. Within days, they deployed dozens of ships and aircraft to search the North Pacific. They combed thousands of square miles of ocean. They found nothing, but the Americans heard everything. The United States Navy operated a sophisticated network of underwater hydrophones called the Sound Surveillance System, known by the acronym SOSUS. These listening devices had been placed on the ocean floor specifically to track Soviet submarine movements during the Cold War. On March 8, 4 Air Force Technical Applications Center sites and the ADAC Alaska SOSUS array all recorded the same catastrophic event. Naval intelligence analyzed the data from multiple listening posts and used triangulation to calculate the location of the acoustic signature to within 5 nautical miles. The submarine had gone down approximately 1,560 miles northwest of Hawaii, in international waters near the 180th meridian. The Soviets were searching hundreds of miles from the actual wreck site. The Americans now faced an extraordinary opportunity and an equally extraordinary challenge. Somewhere on the Pacific Ocean floor, more than 3 miles down, lay a Soviet ballistic missile submarine carrying nuclear weapons, cryptographic equipment, and codebooks. If the United States could recover that submarine, it would be the intelligence coup of the Cold War. But no one had ever attempted a salvage operation at such depths. The technology did not exist. The engineering challenges seemed insurmountable, and the entire operation would have to be conducted in complete secrecy, under the watchful eyes of Soviet intelligence. What followed would become one of the most audacious covert operations in history. The Central Intelligence Agency would spend 6 years and $800 million building a ship specifically designed to steal a submarine from the bottom of the ocean. They would recruit Howard Hughes, one of the most famous and eccentric billionaires in America, to provide cover for the operation. They would lower a giant mechanical claw over 3 miles into the ocean, grab a submarine that weighed over 2,000 tons, and attempt to lift it to the surface without the Soviets realizing what was happening. When mechanical failure caused 2/3 of the submarine to break apart and fall back to the ocean floor, they would conduct a formal military burial at sea for 6 Soviet sailors whose bodies were recovered. And when the operation was exposed by the press, the CIA would create a response that would become legendary in the world of intelligence and government transparency. A response that is still used today whenever agencies want to avoid answering questions. We can neither confirm nor deny. To understand how the CIA came to build a ship to steal a Soviet submarine, you have to understand what K-129 was, why the Soviets lost it, and what made recovering it worth nearly $1 billion in 1974 money. K-129 was a Project 629 submarine, known to NATO as a Golf II-class diesel-electric boat. She was not one of the Soviet Union's newest submarines. She had been launched on May 16, 1959, from Komsomolsk-on-Amur shipyard, number 132 in the Soviet Far East. She measured approximately 325 feet long with a beam of 27 feet. Her standard crew complement was 83 men, though on her final voyage she carried 98 for reasons that remain unclear. She was powered by diesel engines while surfaced and electric motors while submerged, which meant she had to surface regularly to run her diesel generators and recharge her batteries. In the age of nuclear submarines, she was already becoming obsolete. But K-129 carried something that made her strategically vital. In her extended conning tower, she housed 3 SSN-5 Serb ballistic missiles. Each missile carried a single nuclear warhead with an estimated yield of 800 kilotons to 1 megaton. That was 50 to 70 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The missiles had a range of approximately 900 nautical miles, which meant K-129 could strike targets on the west coast of the United States from her patrol station in the Pacific. She also carried 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes. This submarine represented a key component of the Soviet Union's nuclear deterrent force. In January 1968, K-129 was assigned to the 15th Submarine Squadron as part of the 29th Ballistic Missile Division at Rybachi Naval Base on the Kamchatka Peninsula. Her commander was Captain First Rank Vladimir Ivanovich Kobzar. On February 24, 1968, K-129 departed on her third patrol of the year. She was scheduled to return on May 5th. The submarine conducted a test dive in deep water, surfaced, radioed that all was well, and proceeded on patrol toward her station northeast of Hawaii. Then she vanished. The Soviet Navy waited for routine radio check-ins. None came. By mid-March, Soviet officials realized something was wrong. A massive search operation was launched. Ships and aircraft scoured the ocean. U.S. forces watched the Soviet activity with interest and correctly deduced that the Soviets had lost a submarine. That was when U.S. naval intelligence began reviewing acoustic data from the SOSUS network. Naval Facility Point Sur, located south of Monterey, California, isolated a sonic signature on its low-frequency array recordings, an implosion that had occurred on March 8. Using the date and time from Point Sur, Naval Facility ADAC and other West Coast facilities were able to isolate the same acoustic event. With 5 SOSUS lines of bearing, Naval Intelligence localized the wreck site to approximately 40.1 degrees north latitude and 179.9 degrees east longitude. This was near the international date line, hundreds of miles from where the Soviets were searching, and in water approximately 16,500 feet deep. The cause of K-129's loss remains debated. One theory suggests the submarine was operating its snorkel system to recharge batteries when it descended too deep and flooded through the snorkel. Another theory points to a hydrogen explosion from battery charging. The most likely explanation, supported by evidence from similar later incidents, involves a leak in one of the missile tubes. Seawater coming into contact with residue from the missile's liquid propellant could have caused a spontaneous fire, triggering an explosion that breached the pressure hull. Whatever the cause, K-129 and her crew of 98 men were lost. But for American intelligence, the disaster created an unprecedented opportunity. The United States Navy possessed a submarine that had been specially modified for deep ocean reconnaissance. USS Halibut, originally designed as a guided missile submarine, had been converted for special operations in the mid-1960s. The Navy had equipped her with side-looking sonar, sophisticated cameras, and a towed collection system nicknamed the Fish. This was a 12-foot-long, 2-ton package of cameras, strobe lights, and sonar equipment designed to operate at extreme depths. In July 1968, USS Halibut deployed from Pearl Harbor on a mission designated Operation Sand Dollar. Her objective was to locate and photograph K-129. Finding a 300-foot submarine on the vast Pacific Ocean floor was like searching for a needle in a haystack, even with coordinates narrowed to within 5 nautical miles. The Halibut spent weeks methodically combing the search area, dragging the Fish just above the ocean floor at a depth of over 16,000 feet. On August 20, 1968, the Halibut found what she was looking for. The photographs transmitted back by the Fish were stunning. K-129 lay broken on the ocean floor. The submarine had fractured into sections when it hit bottom. The bow section appeared relatively intact, but the pressure hull had been subjected to massive internal destruction before the submarine reached crush depth. This suggested an internal explosion rather than simple flooding. Over the next 3 weeks, the Halibut took more than 20,000 close-up photographs of the wreck from multiple angles. The quality of these images amazed President Lyndon Johnson and Pentagon officials when they were briefed on the mission. The photographs revealed something that made American intelligence officials very interested. The bow section appeared to contain recoverable items, nuclear torpedoes, guidance systems from the ballistic missiles, and potentially the submarine's code books and cryptographic equipment. If the United States could recover those materials, it would provide unprecedented insight into Soviet submarine operations, communications security, and nuclear weapons technology. But the question was whether recovery was even possible. In 1968, the deepest salvage operation ever attempted had recovered objects from about 6,000 feet. K-129 lay at 16,500 feet. At that depth, the water pressure exceeded 7,000 pounds per square inch. Any recovery system would need to lower equipment more than 3 miles down, locate a specific section of submarine on the dark ocean floor, secure it without the corroded metal disintegrating, and lift over 2,000 tons back to the surface, all while operating in international waters where Soviet ships routinely patrolled, and all in complete secrecy. President Johnson, in an election year, deferred the decision to the next administration. So, in mid-1969, it was President Richard Nixon who authorized the Central Intelligence Agency to determine if recovering K-129 was feasible. The agency assigned the project to John Parangosky, a legendary CIA officer known within the intelligence community as Mr. P. Parangosky had managed the development of the Corona spy satellite program, one of the most successful technical intelligence operations of the Cold War. If anyone could figure out how to steal a submarine from the ocean floor, it was Parangosky. Parangosky reported to Carl E. Duckett, the CIA's Deputy Director for Science and Technology. Together, they assembled a team of the best engineers and scientists in America to study the problem. The team examined multiple approaches. One proposal involved using heavy winches to directly lift the submarine. Another suggested attaching flotation devices to the wreck and using compressed gas to create buoyancy. A third idea involved generating gas on the ocean floor through electrolysis to make the submarine float up on its own. Each approach had significant problems. By 1970, the team settled on what they called the grunt lift concept. Build a ship large enough and stable enough to lower a massive capture vehicle to the ocean floor. The capture vehicle would be a giant mechanical claw that could close around the target section of submarine, secure it, and hold it during the lift to the surface. The submarine would be lifted into a moon pool, a large opening in the bottom of the ship's hull, so that it would never be visible from the surface. This would allow the recovery to proceed even if Soviet ships were nearby. The engineering challenges were staggering. No ship had ever been built that could lift thousands of tons from such depths while maintaining precise station keeping in the open ocean. The lift would require a string of steel pipe sections, strong enough to support the weight, yet flexible enough to handle ocean currents and the ship's motion. The capture vehicle would need to operate in complete darkness under crushing pressure, and all of this would have to work on the first attempt, because there would likely be no second chance. But before they could build the ship, they needed a cover story. The CIA could not simply construct a massive vessel with a derrick and moon pool without attracting attention. Soviet intelligence watched American shipyards. They would want to know what such a ship was for. The deception would need to be plausible enough that the Soviets would believe it, and complex enough that they could not easily disprove it. That was where Howard Hughes came in. Howard Hughes was one of the most famous and enigmatic figures in America. The billionaire industrialist had built an empire spanning aviation, defense contracting, and Hollywood. By the 1970s, Hughes was a recluse whose eccentricities were legendary, but his companies maintained deep relationships with the CIA, having built reconnaissance satellites and intelligence systems. His reputation as an unconventional maverick who pursued ambitious ventures made him perfect for the cover story. If Howard Hughes wanted to build a ship to mine the ocean floor, people would believe it because that was exactly the kind of thing Howard Hughes would do. The agency approached Hughes in 1970 with an unusual request. They wanted to use his name and corporate structure as cover for a classified project. Hughes agreed. The false front was elegant. Global Marine Development Incorporated, a real company that specialized in deep water drilling and ocean engineering, would design and build a deep-sea mining vessel for Howard Hughes. The ship would be called the Hughes Glomar Explorer. Glomar was a contraction of Global Marine. The Explorer's stated purpose was to extract manganese nodules from the Pacific Ocean floor. Manganese nodules are potato-sized rocks containing nickel, copper, cobalt, and manganese that form naturally on the deep ocean floor. In the early 1970s, there was genuine interest in deep-sea mining as companies looked for new sources of strategic minerals. Several corporations were seriously exploring the technology. It was a plausible facade. In reality, Hughes and his senior staff had almost zero involvement in the actual ship design or operation. The CIA hired Glomar to build the ship to agency specifications. Lockheed Missiles and Space Company designed the capture vehicle. The project was compartmented under tight security protocols. The security designation was Jennifer, though reporters would later incorrectly refer to the entire operation as Project Jennifer. The actual program name was Azorian. Someone at the CIA had pulled the name from a registry of randomly assigned code words. Azorian means related to the Azores Islands in the Atlantic Ocean. It had no connection to stealing submarines, which was exactly the point. Construction began on the Hughes Glomar Explorer in 1971 at Sun Shipbuilding and Drydock Company near Philadelphia. The ship was massive, 618 feet long with a beam of 115 feet. It displaced 63,300 tons when fully loaded. The derrick rising from the center of the ship stood over 200 feet tall, taller than a 20-story building. This derrick would handle the pipe string that connected the capture vehicle to the ship. The moon pool measured 199 feet long by 74 feet wide, large enough to accommodate the entire forward section of K-129. The ship was equipped with sophisticated dynamic positioning systems that used computer-controlled thrusters to maintain position above a target with minimal drift. This was critical because any significant movement during the lift could snap the pipe string or damage the submarine section being recovered. The capture vehicle, nicknamed Clementine, was built by Lockheed and tested at a secret location. Clementine was essentially a giant underwater grab with heavy hydraulic arms that could close around the target. It weighed thousands of tons and was designed to operate at depths that would crush conventional equipment. The individual pipe sections that would connect Clementine to the ship were 60 feet long. 579 pipe sections would be needed to reach the ocean floor. These sections had to be assembled one at a time during the lift, a process that would take days. While the Glomar Explorer was being built, the CIA worked with scientists to develop methods for preserving materials that had been underwater for 6 years. They were particularly interested in recovering and reading the submarine's code books, but paper that had been submerged at extreme pressure for years presented unique preservation challenges. Chemical treatments were developed that might allow waterlogged documents to be dried and read. The ship completed sea trials in 1973. The CIA conducted a test recovery mission using a mock submarine section to verify that all systems worked. The test was successful. On June 20, 1974, the Hughes Glomar Explorer departed Long Beach, California, on her first operational mission. President Richard Nixon had personally approved the operation on June 7. The ship carried a crew of 170, including CIA operatives, engineers from Glomar and Lockheed, Navy personnel, and civilian mariners. Most of the crew did not know the ship's true purpose until they were at sea. The Glomar Explorer arrived at the recovery site on July 4, 1974. The location was 40 degrees, 6 minutes north latitude, 179 degrees, 54 minutes east longitude, 1,560 miles northwest of Hawaii. The ship established position directly above the wreck and began lowering the capture vehicle. The Soviets were watching. Within days of the Glomar's arrival, Soviet vessels appeared at the site. First came SB-10, an ocean-going tugboat, then Chashma, a missile-range instrumentation ship bristling with antennas and surveillance equipment. The Soviet ships circled the Glomar Explorer, observing operations. At one point, crew members on the Glomar piled crates on the deck to prevent Soviet helicopters from landing. The CIA team maintained their pretense. "We are testing deep-sea mining equipment. We are collecting manganese nodules for analysis." The Soviets watched, but did not interfere. What the crew did not know at the time was that Soviet intelligence had received warnings about the operation. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, declassified documents revealed that Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin had sent urgent messages to Moscow warning that an American salvage operation was imminent. But Soviet military commanders reviewed the intelligence and concluded it was impossible. No one could lift a submarine from over 5 kilometers down. The technology did not exist. They disregarded the warnings as speculation. On August 1, 1974, the Glomar Explorer began the actual recovery operation. The pipe string was slowly lowered through the moon pool, section by section. Each pipe section had to be carefully aligned and connected. The operation proceeded around the clock. After more than a week, Clementine reached the ocean floor. Remote cameras and sonar guided the capture vehicle into position over the target section of K-129. The hydraulic claws closed around the submarine's hull. The crew had successfully grappled the wreck. Then came the lift. Slowly, carefully, the pipe string was winched upward. The submarine began to rise from the ocean floor, where it had rested for 6 years. The entire crew understood that mechanical failure at any point could cause catastrophic problems. The pipe string was supporting weight at the absolute limit of its design specifications. Any significant stress could cause failures. The lift proceeded for 3 days without incident. The operations center aboard the Glomar was tense but controlled. Engineers monitored strain gauges and video feeds constantly. The submarine section was approximately halfway to the surface, suspended at a depth of about 8,000 feet, when the crew heard sounds that made their blood run cold. Sharp metallic pops transmitted through the pipe string. The sounds came in bursts, like gunfire echoing through steel. Engineers scrambled to their monitoring stations. Video feeds from cameras positioned along the pipe string showed something terrifying. Cracks were forming in some of Clementine's massive hydraulic claws. The claws were manufactured from maraging steel, a material chosen for its extreme strength. But maraging steel has a weakness. It is not particularly ductile compared to other steels. Under the combined stresses of depth, weight, and lifting forces accumulated over days, microscopic fractures were propagating through the metal. The engineers watched helplessly as the cracks grew. There was nothing they could do. Stopping the lift would not help. The damage was done. They could only continue pulling and hope the claws held long enough to reach the surface. The metallic pops grew louder, more frequent. The crew felt vibrations through the ship's hull. Some of Clementine's claws were beginning to shear off entirely. The submarine section was shifting in the grip, unstable, its corroded hull weakening under stresses it was never designed to withstand. Then it happened. A sound like thunder rolled through the ship. A massive section of the submarine broke free and plummeted back to the ocean floor. Approximately 2/3 of what they had lifted, roughly 100 feet of submarine, was lost. Engineers stared at their monitors in stunned silence. The section that fell included the conning tower where the ballistic missiles were housed. It included most of the code books. It included most of the crew remains. Everything the CIA most wanted to recover had just fallen 3 miles back into the abyss. The remaining section, approximately 38 feet of bow, stayed secure in Clementine's remaining grip. The crew continued the lift. There was nothing else they could do. The mission had taken 6 years to plan, cost $800 million, and pushed the limits of human engineering. They would finish what they started. On August 9, 1974, the bow section of K-129 was raised into the moon pool of the Hughes Glomar Explorer. After 6 years of planning, Project Azorian had partially succeeded. The recovered section was not what the CIA had hoped for, but it was not worthless. It included 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes, which provided valuable intelligence about Soviet nuclear weapons design. Various submarine components like hatch covers, instruments, and sonar equipment were recovered and analyzed. Other crew members have reported that documents and materials of interest to CIA personnel were recovered, though exactly what intelligence was obtained remains classified. Most significantly, the section included the remains of 6 Soviet sailors. The crew made a decision that would later be seen as one of the more humane moments of the Cold War. On September 4, 1974, approximately 90 nautical miles southwest of Hawaii, personnel aboard the Hughes Glomar Explorer conducted a formal military burial at sea for the 6 Soviet sailors. The ceremony was carefully planned and filmed. An honor guard stood at attention on the deck, their uniforms crisp against the Pacific sky. The United States national anthem was played first, the notes carrying across the water. Then came the Soviet national anthem. The crew stood silently as the familiar melody honored men who had been enemies in life, but were now receiving respect in death. A CIA officer who spoke Russian read prayers in both English and Russian, ensuring the ceremony followed proper Russian Orthodox burial traditions. The words spoke of eternal rest and the sea as a final home for sailors of all nations. The bodies were placed in a steel chamber because of radioactive contamination from the nuclear torpedoes. Soviet naval flags were draped over the chamber, the hammer and sickle visible against the red cloth. The sailors were identified by name when possible: Viktor Lokov, Vladimir Kostyushko, Valentin Nosachev, 3 others whose names could not be determined. As the prayers concluded, the chamber was committed to the sea. It slipped beneath the waves without a sound, returning the sailors to the ocean that had claimed them 6 years earlier. The burial was filmed because the CIA anticipated that someday, when the operation became public, they would need to prove that the remains had been treated with respect. That film would remain classified for 18 years. In 1992, CIA Director Robert Gates presented the burial video to Russian President Boris Yeltsin as a gesture of goodwill after the Cold War had ended. The video shows American sailors and CIA personnel standing at attention as the steel casket is lowered into the Pacific. It remains one of the most unusual and moving documents of Cold War relations. Enemies in life, honored in death by the nation that stole their submarine. The Hughes Glomar Explorer returned to Long Beach in late September 1974. The CIA immediately began planning a second mission to recover the section that had fallen back to the ocean floor. Everything needed for a return voyage was being prepared. But a bizarre and totally unforeseen occurrence had already set in motion events that would make a second mission impossible. In June 1974, just before the Glomar Explorer sailed on her first mission, thieves had broken into the offices of Summa Corporation, one of Howard Hughes's companies. The burglary appeared to be a random crime, but among the items stolen was a document linking Howard Hughes to the CIA and the Glomar Explorer. The CIA immediately called in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI enlisted the Los Angeles Police Department. All 3 agencies desperately searched for the stolen document, but the search itself attracted attention. Local police sources began leaking information to reporters. By autumn 1974, journalists were picking up rumors of a sensational story involving Howard Hughes, the CIA, and a secret ship. On February 7, 1975, the Los Angeles Times published an article making connections between the robbery, Hughes, the CIA, and a submarine recovery operation. The story was incomplete and contained errors, but it exposed enough that other media organizations began investigating. Seymour Hersh, the legendary investigative reporter for the New York Times, had actually been working on the story since 1973. But CIA Director William Colby had personally appealed to Hersh and his editors to suppress publication for national security reasons. The Times had agreed. Now, with the Los Angeles Times breaking the story, that agreement was void. The New York Times published its account in March 1975. Time magazine followed with more details. On March 18, 1975, syndicated broadcaster Jack Anderson aired a television report that fully exposed the Glomar Explorer's mission. Anderson rejected pleas from Director Colby to suppress the story, arguing that Navy experts had told him the submarine contained no real secrets and the project was a waste of taxpayers' money. Project Azorian was now public knowledge. The Ford administration was furious. President Gerald Ford, Secretary of Defense James Schlesinger, and Director Colby held emergency meetings to discuss damage control. The CIA had been caught conducting a covert operation during a period when Congress and the public were demanding greater transparency from intelligence agencies. This was the aftermath of Watergate, the Church Committee investigations, and growing skepticism about government secrecy. The media exposure of Project Azorian came at the worst possible time. Then journalists began filing Freedom of Information Act requests seeking more details about the operation. Harriet Ann Philippi, a journalist, filed a FOIA request asking for documents about the CIA's attempts to suppress publication of the Glomar story. The agency found itself in an impossible position. If they confirmed that such documents existed, they would be officially acknowledging the operation, which could further damage relations with the Soviet Union. If they denied the documents existed, they would be lying, which could be proved. The agency needed a third option. That option was created by Walt Logan, an associate general counsel at the CIA. Logan crafted a response that would become legendary in legal and intelligence circles. The CIA replied to Philippi's FOIA request with carefully chosen words. "We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of the information requested, but hypothetically, if such data were to exist, the subject matter would be classified and could not be disclosed. Neither confirm nor deny." The phrase was brilliant. By refusing to confirm or deny, the CIA avoided the trap of either lying or revealing classified information. The response acknowledged nothing, while preserving the possibility of everything. Philippi sued, arguing the CIA should be required to provide information about what records it held. The case went to the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. In a ruling that would shape transparency law for decades, the court upheld the CIA's position. The court ruled that agencies could refuse to confirm or deny the existence of records, where confirming or denying would itself reveal classified information. The Glomar Response, as it came to be known, is now a standard tool used by government agencies responding to FOIA requests. It has been applied in contexts far beyond national security, including law enforcement records and privacy cases. The phrase has entered popular culture. When the CIA joined Twitter on June 6, 2014, its very first tweet was, "We can neither confirm nor deny that this is our first tweet." The agency that had created the phrase was now using it for public relations. But the exposure of Project Azorian had immediate consequences for the operation. The Soviets, who had been suspicious but uncertain, now knew exactly what had occurred. Soviet ships were dispatched to guard the wreck site of K-129. Any second recovery mission was now impossible. The portion of the submarine that included the ballistic missiles and most of the code books would remain on the ocean floor. The debate over whether Project Azorian was a success or failure continues to this day. The CIA officially considers the operation one of the greatest intelligence coups of the Cold War. The recovered materials provided valuable insights into Soviet submarine design, nuclear weapons technology, and possibly other systems, though exactly what intelligence was obtained remains largely classified. Critics point out that the operation cost $800 million in 1974 money, equivalent to approximately $5.1 billion today, and recovered only a small fraction of the submarine. The most valuable intelligence, the ballistic missiles and code books, were lost when the submarine broke apart during the lift. Some intelligence historians and former CIA officials have suggested that the official story of the submarine breaking apart may itself be a cover story. They point to circumstantial evidence, including the ship's bell from K-129 being returned to Russia in 1993. The bell was permanently mounted in the middle of the conning tower, which supposedly fell back to the ocean floor. If the bell was recovered, these critics argue, then more of the submarine must have been recovered than officially acknowledged. But without access to classified files, these claims remain speculation. What is not speculation is the technological achievement. Project Azorian remains the deepest salvage operation ever conducted. The Hughes Glomar Explorer and its lifting systems were engineering marvels that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. The techniques developed for Azorian influenced future deep ocean recovery operations and advanced the state-of-the-art in underwater technology. The same deep submergence capabilities used to find K-129 were later used for Operation Ivy Bells, a classified mission to tap Soviet underwater communications cables. The ship itself had an interesting afterlife. After Project Azorian, the Glomar Explorer was briefly used for legitimate deep-sea mining experiments, but attracted no buyers. The ship was mothballed for over 2 decades. In the late 1990s, a petroleum company leased and refitted the vessel for deep-sea oil drilling. Renamed GSF Explorer, the ship was used for offshore drilling operations around the world. In 2015, the ship was finally scrapped. Several of the key figures in Project Azorian would go on to distinguished careers. John Parangoski continued managing classified technical programs for the CIA. Carl Duckett left the agency and worked in the private sector, occasionally intimating to former colleagues that the CIA had recovered more from K-129 than was publicly acknowledged. John Graham, the naval architect who designed the Glomar Explorer's unique hull and lifting systems, became a legend in ocean engineering circles. Curtis Crook, of Global Marine Development, who helped create the grunt lift concept, went on to lead other deep ocean projects. The legacy of Project Azorian extends beyond intelligence and engineering. The operation became a symbol of the tension between government secrecy and democratic transparency. The Glomar Response, born from this operation, represents the ongoing struggle to balance national security with the public's right to know. In an era when citizens can file Freedom of Information Act requests for government documents, how do agencies respond when even acknowledging whether documents exist could compromise security or privacy? The answer, courtesy of a submarine recovery operation in 1974, is that sometimes they neither confirm nor deny. The operation also demonstrated something about Cold War relations that is easy to forget. Even at the height of global tensions, there were moments of humanity. The burial ceremony for 6 Soviet sailors, conducted with full military honors by the nation that had stolen their submarine, showed that respect for the dead could transcend political enmity. When Robert Gates presented the burial video to Boris Yeltsin nearly 2 decades later, it served as a reminder that Cold War adversaries had been human beings, not abstract enemies. K-129 herself remains on the Pacific Ocean floor. The sections that were not recovered in 1974 are still there, over 5 kilometers down in international waters. The submarine has become a tomb for 92 Soviet sailors whose remains were never recovered. The cause of her loss is still debated by submarine experts and naval historians. Did she suffer a battery explosion, a missile propellant fire, a catastrophic flooding? The complete truth may never be known. But the story of what happened after K-129 sank has become one of the most fascinating episodes in intelligence history. It is a story about technological ambition and human ingenuity. It is about the billions of dollars and thousands of hours that nations will invest to gain an advantage over their adversaries. It is about the elaborate deceptions that governments create to hide their actions. And it is about the unexpected ways that humanity can emerge even in the darkest moments of international rivalry. The Hughes Glomar Explorer was built to steal a submarine from the bottom of the ocean. She succeeded, partially. She failed, partially. Like much of intelligence work, the operation exists in shades of grey rather than clear success or failure. What is clear is that Project Azorian represented an extraordinary feat of engineering, an audacious intelligence operation, and a defining moment in the history of government secrecy. And it gave the world a phrase that would outlive the operation itself. A phrase that government agencies still use 50 years later whenever they want to avoid answering questions. A phrase that has become shorthand for the limits of transparency in a democratic society that also needs to keep secrets. We can neither confirm nor deny. If you found this account meaningful, please like this video. It helps us share more essential chapters from Cold War history and intelligence operations. Subscribe to stay connected with these stories that reveal how technology, espionage, and geopolitics shaped the modern world. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans continents and generations, united by commitment to understanding the hidden history that shaped the present. Thank you for watching.